My name is Kourosh Salehi. I'm an architect. Currently, I'm the design principal for LWK+MENA. LWK is a Hong Kong-based company, and we set up our Dubai branch just over 2 years ago. And I'm talking to you from Dubai.
How architecture happened in your life, like what was your inspiration behind coming into architecture, and what made you select architecture as studies as a young person?
Sure. Well, I started my architecture training in London. That's where I went to school. And it was 1982, having just graduated from art school, art college. I started my university as an architect. So the early 1980s were an exciting time for young students in London, where the design landscape was thriving with publications, debates, evening talks, and exhibitions. One of my favorite places to hang out as a venue was a small bookshop called the Triangle Bookshop, which was at the Architectural Association or the AA.
Yeah.
Yes, and so I would regularly attend evening talks and exhibitions at the AA, and I had a number of friends there. And there were opportunities to meet and interact with like-minded people at these events. And I met a few people. One such people was one of the AA tutors who had just won the peak competition. And her name is obviously Zaha Hadid.
Oh.
So she had herself was young, but I had just started her own practice, but she was teaching at the AA. After I heard that she's won the peak competition, I was I think in my second degree year, and I was also writing for an architectural magazine called a newspaper called the A3 Times. So as a reporter, young reporter, I called Zaha and I said, I'd like to do an interview with you, which I did. And after the interview was finished, I asked if she would be interested to show her work at our university. So I invited her for a talk. And to my amazement, she accepted. And at the evening of her talk, I would say about 400 students and lecturers had turned up, which is a big number in London, by the way. And I, a very nervous 19-year-old, introduced her on the auditorium stage. If my memory serves me correctly, that was winter 1983. Hadid's work and persona was a huge inspiration to young me. Throughout my undergraduate years, I looked up to her and her work, her boldness and her lack of reverence, if you like, for all that was considered as accepted norm. Even, inspired me. I found the architectural world of the early 80s very, very stale. It didn't appeal to me at all. There were a few sort of star architects and so-called superstars around, but they didn't appeal to me at all, and they were very, very remote from me and my world as a young person. And I don't know what was about Zaha, and like I said, maybe primarily was her boldness that was very, you know, I was emerging from the punk era, and I probably am the first one to say that there was something quite punkish about Zaha. So that was sort of the first couple of years of university. In 1985, the year of my graduation, I went on to represent my university at the Venice Biennale. And obviously I was extremely delighted about this. I remember I sent a postcard to Zaha. So those days we couldn't email or WhatsApp, you know. So I filled in a postcard with a sketch, and I sort of let him know that my work was going to be shown at the Venice Biennale. It's interesting, when I received the letter that said that my work was selected to be exhibited, you know, the first person that I thought I should let know wasn't my parents. It was Hadid. So I sent this postcard, but I wasn't. I was gutted, though not entirely surprised, when I didn't get a reply from her. Although a few weeks later, I got a message that Zaha is looking for a research assistant for some work she was considering to take on. If my memory serves me right, it was the London Docklands, which at the time was essentially just a huge, vast mud field. So she was doing some research. So I went to her office and we met, and I subsequently sort of became her assistant at her newly open office in Farringdon, which was a much smaller place than it became obviously a lot larger.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. How young were you then when you went to her office?
I 21. I just graduated. Just 1985. I just got my degree. So
okay,
this is exactly 35 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, so you were 21 when you went there.
Yes. You got to put it in context. Sort of Zaha just started her office, and
yes,
while she had fame, and she was already a you know, amongst certain groups of people very well known, but it wasn't the Zaha that in subsequent years she became. So what, in terms of her work and influence, I think through her work style, she paints a conceptual design of you know, of her many projects in this fluid geometry, almost exploding the site and the program. And anybody who's known or has worked with her would say that her work was as true to her as a person, as a woman, as an architect, and very representative, and a complex person, by the way. So as a practicing architect, Zaha's work was committed to modernism ideals, and yet fundamentally shifted the geometry of buildings and how they are perceived today. I think buildings and architecture is perceived, I would say, significantly sort of differently now than it did before Zaha did. I'm not saying she's the only one. Obviously, technology and many other designers participated and are sort of have contributed to that. But I think her work was fresh, bold, and exciting. So a few years later, I followed my academic studies and practiced with a master's degree at Kingston University. That's also in London. But this time, my particular focus was the American modernist Louis Kahn. So I've been working and I've been studying for 4 years or so. This is the late 80s, and I'm growing and developing as an architect myself. And which is why I found Kahn's work interesting. Kahn, like Hadid, is a modernist, yet unlike Hadid, who defies any notion of reference as a basis, is his dichotomy in architecture combines the peace and tranquility, if you like, of classical architecture with the restlessness of modernist abstraction, where Hadid's was, I wouldn't say, from the outset, she wasn't interested in the detail or the points of transitions of space, and it was driven by the form and the overall impact of the building as an almost solitary sculptural element. Louis Kahn would painstakingly consider the context, the city context, and would be more focused on the space and the way the light was directed, and the human scale experience to Kahn was a challenge and a point of focus. So that's the two differences between two modernists of two different scales. Obviously, Louis Kahn's body of work, likes the Exeter Library, the British Art Museum, at Yale University. That's the one I actually did. Kahn's body of work, like the Exeter Library, the British Art Museum at Yale University, which is the one that I actually did my master's on, and Kimball Art Museum, amongst others, like the Parliament Building in Dhaka, are all of that ilk, where space and the classical theming and interpretation of form is celebrated and defined. But with Kahn, there is a muscular building managed to be simultaneously primitive and refined through geometry, repetition, and variation. They combine the modernist technique of decontextualizing, if you like, the familiar elements with the serene balance, like we said, of classicism. So Kahn's buildings remain a benchmark for many contemporary architects like Norman Foster, James Sterling, Herzog de Meuron, Renzo Piano, to name a few. And I would say, since the early 90s, I myself still consider Louis Kahn as one of the thinkers and a very solid figure in architecture. Continued my work in London primarily as an architect for another 20 years on various projects with several great practices. And during this period, I also studied master planning and urban design.
Okay.
And had the opportunity to be one of the architects very earlier on and Urbanist to help out with the London King's Cross master plan.
Okay.
This is one of Europe's largest urban regeneration programs. It's about revitalizing a sort of a historical part of London. But what was important about King's Cross, it was the way that, for me as a real urban design, mixed use, architecture and planning, it very close up. You were working with a number of different disciplines. At one stage, you wanted to revitalize historical fabric of the city, in a way because it'd been neglected and it was falling apart and it was crime ridden and was not a very desirable part of the city. So we were trying to inject a vision and hope, if you like, reinvigorate, create employment, but in some cases to just give back to the city the walls, the historical walls of that, the architecture, some of its past glory, because especially the warehouse buildings, they obviously couldn't be warehouses anymore, but they could be offices, and they could be hotels, they could be restaurants, and that robust muscular stature of Victorian architecture could all of a sudden become alive again. Yeah, so for 5 years, I think I worked on that project. I learned a lot. I hope that I contributed a little bit, but it was a significant part of, I would say, of my work then. But it also began to sort of enlight the passion for the city, that architecture is not alone. Architecture is not creating standalone edifices, but it needs to interact with the context.
Yes.
It needs to relate. It needs to inform and be informed, and it's a dialogue. Sometimes I like to think that it's a tango. There is a give or take. So unlike what Rem Koolhaas has said about the context, I think context is fundamental, and enriches buildings and ultimately the life of the users. So that's a run through the first 20-odd years of my life as an architect.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these information, because this is so intellectual, like so high intellectual energy when you are sharing all of these things, and I'm sure our viewers will find it very fascinating what you're sharing with us, because there are very few people who have shared the earlier experiences of setting up an office with Zaha Hadid and the experiences which you are sharing. And Mr. Kourosh,
I didn't set up, I don't have a claim. I was a young assistant.
Yes. I know you have you have clearly mentioned that you're an assistant to Zaha, and like Zaha, like of course she has been an inspiration for the entire generation and what she have done. And would you like to share an experience, like, because you have worked, I hope, closely with Zaha during that time when you were an assistant to Zaha, that would you like to share an experience? What makes people like Zaha so great in the work they do?
Look, this is an awful long time ago, so I really am not the best person to share experiences. I think we all change over the years, and I know Zaha did as well. Zaha of the mid-80s, like I said, she was starting out herself. Her Farringdon office was just what in comparison was an empty warehouse of one or two people, and people like me. We weren't working, we weren't getting paid. We were there for the passion and had energy. So I have no claim on to sort of knowing the great Zaha, but the younger Zaha, what I have already said, what I found interesting about her, that it's the story that I've probably said this before, that I went to the Walthamstow College of Art because when I arrived in London, I knew there was a punk singer called Ian Dury, and you guys probably wouldn't know him. It's of a different generation.
Yes.
But I found him and his music, and my generation, he was a huge star. I found him fascinating, and I knew that he'd gone to Walthamstow College of Art, and I just wanted to, I thought I could be a cool guy if I went to the same school as Ian Dury. And I by maybe I didn't sort of show that in my own practice, but I've again, I'm probably one of the first people who would describe Zaha as punk, and I mean that in the most respectful way, in a way that her energy and the fact that she defined her own path. She wasn't going to be tied down with anything. I mean, in fact, if you wanted to sort of get Zaha to do something else, or is to tell her either what to do or what not to do. So that was the Zaha, that at least that I knew. But the other thing that, I mean, there were many, and throughout the history, there have been many people who've had this attitude. What made Zaha different again was her tenacity and her perseverance, and she had an amazing self-belief. I mean, there were times that she wasn't being paid anything, and she had a very, what relatively sort of not an easy existence in terms of financially and so on, but she had that belief that she would build. I remember when I invited, even as a student, I invited her to university. Quite a few of my tutors sort of were extremely dismissive about her. I mean, who's this girl? You can't really sort of think that she's so great. I mean, she's no Norman Foster and all of that. The number of times I heard that. But I'm sure she must have heard it. I mean, the British press were extremely dismissive about her. When she won the Cardiff Opera House competition, she genuinely won it. And in fact, she didn't just win it once, she won it 2-3 times, because there were stages in competition. She kept winning it, and then they introduced another stage. And I think once I heard her say that halfway through the competition, they started inviting other architects, which I won't name, so hoping that she would go away, but she didn't. She stayed and she won. And then they had actively sort of tried to dissuade her from taking part. And in the end, I think they gave the project to a more pragmatic architect. Again, I won't mention their names. I don't know if they're still around. And that was extremely disheartening. The press, when she was winning international competitions, she was the great British architect.
Yes.
And then when they didn't agree with her point of view, she was the Iraqi architect.
Yes.
Who's culturally not, it doesn't connect with us. And I remember a number of people in Cardiff saying that. Look, this is a bad celebration. I don't want to get negative.
No, I mean,
But
in a way, this is so positive, because what you're giving is a hope. Because in Dubai, there are a lot of great architects like you and other people who are working. And then there are a lot of cities like New York, where people are coming from many places and are working. And it is so inspiring that there is an architect who have set herself up in the world in a very unique way, which no one else can like there is no one like Zaha Hadid. So it's a really great experience what you're sharing.
yes, I mean her work I mean, yeah, her work speaks for itself, and yeah, she will go down at one of 20th century's greatest. So
Uh, and Mr. Kourosh, now since you have spent most of your time while you were working actively during your earlier time as a professional, you were working in Britain, I guess, and then you moved to other part of the world. So what do you think is the major difference between the two worlds when you think as an architect and as a designer?
I think what happened was that in 2005 in London, I was asked to set up the urban design division of the practice that I was working for in Beijing. And so this was just 3 years before the Beijing Olympics. And so I basically was given a ticket, an airplane ticket, and I was met by an interpreter at the airport in Beijing, and all of a sudden I was supposed to find work. And because this was before 2008 Beijing Olympics, you know, all the architects in the world were there, all of them doing pretty much what I was trying to do, i.e. trying to establish themselves. So, and I started there by, effectively, I started by doing the talk circuits. I had some academic friends. By then, I'd already was also teaching in the UK, and I was an examiner, etc. So, because of those connections, I managed to get to some universities, and through talking about design and really just enthusing about design and thought leadership, managed to sort of secure some of the institutions who then, etc., then invited us to work with them. What I found with China then, and then when I came to the Middle East some years later, I found that there will always be challenges. The challenges are everywhere. Challenges are the reality of life. I think they are the very essential components of life are in fact challenges, and you just need to navigate through the maze. But what was interesting in China, that I felt that as if a glass ceiling had been removed, all of a sudden, you know, I felt that doors opened, and my words, my thoughts were being somehow absorbed a little bit more. Some of it is perhaps to do with the fact that I was operating in London. London is a tough, challenging city because it's large, it's complex, it's impersonal. I'm not saying that Beijing isn't large or personal, but somehow there was the novelty of this guy who doesn't speak Mandarin and has got the audacity to want to attend jury sessions at some of the top universities. But anyway, it happened, and in 2010, because of, in fact, it was my mixed-use urban design work that I got contacted by a practice in the UAE. They flew me over from London to UAE, and with the view of setting and heading their urban design and master planning work for them. And that was 10 years ago, and I stayed on. And the work, again, as I said, in UAE, it's not without its challenges, but I think the application and the opportunities, for me at least, was a lot greater.
Mm. And when you are not just designing, you are also setting up the studio in certain region. Do you think that there is a certain characteristics you need of an entrepreneur while you are setting up the practices in the new regions, that when you were sent to Beijing or you are in Middle East and you are setting up the whole office now?
Okay. Moment of truth here.
Yes.
I'm the least entrepreneurial person that I know.
But
let it be on record.
But why do you think so?
Because I am. That's fact. But what I lack in entrepreneurship, I have bags of passion. I believe architecture matters. I fundamentally believe that designing good places for people and letting them know and enthuse, and everybody wants a better life. And as a designer, I'm passionate and I believe in it. And when I enthuse about it to developers, to governments, and hopefully sometimes I propose an alternative way of perceiving a different realm in city design or in building design. Sometimes people respond, and that's what I would say. I'm better at that than I am as an entrepreneur.
Okay, and do you think that now at this stage, because things are changing a lot, because you have seen while 20 years ago you have seen that things were not that tech driven, but in this world when we are talking about things in 2020, so a lot of things are driven by technology. So do you think that the way technology is coming and driving this architecture industry, that it is a positive sign, there are some negative signs about it? What do you think, because you have seen both the worlds?
Do I think technology is negative? No. That's a short answer, and it's an honest one, in a sense that technology is technology. It's the rest is about human application. The rest is about how it's utilized. Technology can sit there and doesn't do anything, doesn't go anywhere. It just takes a person with a human will and determination or intent or malintent to see what it can do with technology. So technology in itself is not, it's just a tool, like a hammer or I don't know, a saw or a bulldozer. A computer program. Something I tell my students a lot. These are information, but information is not knowledge. In the days of Wikipedia and Google, we have access to information, but do we know what to do with it? Do we have the ability to then analyze it and apply it in a beautiful human way? Do we have the solutions to resolve problems? So information, like I said, is just facts and figures, a bit like technology. It's knowledge that it's about experience, it's about creativity.
Mr. Kourosh, since a lot of our viewers are young artists, young architects, and people who are just coming out of the colleges and universities, and what I face that when I'm talking to a lot of those people, that most of the young professionals today are they get frustrated very easily because they are looking for growth very fastly. But when we are talking to someone like you, we can see that there is a journey of 3 decades, three and a half decades, which have made you seasoned as a great professional. Do you think that you have a piece of advice for people who are coming out of universities and who are already out of university and they are venturing out in the world?
I don't do advice. Don't listen to anybody. The only advice I can give people is don't listen to any advice. I think life's a journey. We need to tread our own path. We all need to learn our own way. I don't know.
And
I really, that's a tough one. I don't like giving advice. I think people would work it out for themselves.
How do you see that world, which is specifically, I'm talking about Southeast Asia, because now you have experience in this particular part of the world. Like, how do you see architecture of this particular part of the world going forward from here, after 2 decades, after 3 decades? How do you see the architecture world here in Southeast Asia?
I think architecture across Asia, I think the built environment in all of Asia, it's at a very interesting juncture. I think finally governments and city fathers and developers are looking at cities as human environments. By human environments, I mean all the challenges, all the constraints that the world throws at us, the global warming, the political turmoil, the lack of resources. All of these are elements that we cannot be sort of simplistic or idealistic about what a building should be or what a city should be. And we need to engage more fundamentally with the essence of good and workable solutions to our severe, sort of potential severe problems. Asia has great talents, young people who are increasingly well educated, and parents who themselves dedicate their lives and their life's earnings towards the new generation. So that's a huge asset. And you can already see some of the best buildings and some of the best projects are actually now on a huge scale are coming from the Asia as a continent generally. And I think the future, really 21st century, will be defined one way or other, would be defined by the engagement and the potential of the Asian market. So there's enormous possibilities, and good work is being done. But I don't think it should be taken lightly. It shouldn't be and there needs to be a seriousness without wanting to make this too dark. But I think that there needs to be an acknowledgement that we have challenges. We have real challenges. And I think that architects and urban designers can lead and at least be part of that solution. What we do as we solve problems, architects, urban design, we solve problems, we solve city problems. So to do that, you need to, first of all, acknowledge the problems and have the tools to recognize the problem, and then see what could be applied as solutions and resolutions of those. So I think the young graduates, designers, thinkers, creative thinkers are all part of the future, and they will be sort of called upon to participate, and I hope they do.
Yes, I'm sure. And you just mentioned about that there are some challenges which we have in the future, and we as an architect, it's our responsibility to like we should look forward for the challenges and solve them for the society at city level, at urban level. And what do you think? What are the some of the major challenges which you can see at this point in the Asian region, if we can talk about them?
I've already pointed out, I think the um, the uh, the sustainable or the lack of sustainability um, agendas of some governments, um, it's fundamental. I think the attention we pay to the planet is getting more and more urgent. What we do into our forests, what we do into our natural resources, the shortages of potable water, the lack of education, the lack of opportunities for women, um, the lack of tolerance between different sects and different religions, uh, politicians who would like to exploit us. All of these are severe challenges. And it's important that for, for creatives to be aware and participate. And it's important to know and be mindful that there is a better alternative. There are other solutions. I mean, we're talking about thinkers who weren't just accepted, they weren't accepting the status quo, and that's how they managed to change things for the better. And I urge uh, the young designers, young graduates who might be seeing this, that don't. I said, don't take advice. Now I'm advising. But don't take advice, but really it's to find out things for themselves. Don't accept things just because they were born in a particular culture. Or I'm not saying that they should rebel against their parents all of a sudden, but nevertheless, a free thinker should be able to investigate and ask questions and find their own answers. Uh, this generation, more than any generation before it, has access to information, like we said. Let them ask questions. Why are things the way they are? You know, so I think it's important that we arm ourselves with knowledge through information and
Yes.
investment of time.
Mm. And Mr. Kourosh, when we talk about some of the emerging cities in the world or some of the hubs of this contemporary world of design, then Dubai is always at the epicenter. Everyone is talking about Dubai when we are talking about the design world or architecture or real estate. So, how do you see Dubai growing in next 10 years? Like, what's your vision for Dubai in coming time?
I think we should put Dubai in the context of the United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
Um, I say that because Abu Dhabi is um, doing some amazing stuff as well. I mean, Abu Dhabi's sustainable agenda is incredible. Uh, what they are doing to the in terms of to assist with with understanding and preserving our environment um, is uh, is uh, is one of the best in the world. Dubai has a different approach. Dubai's been visionary. Dubai's has been able to create a hub for all of those who prepared to uh, take risks, invest, whether it's intellectually, yeah, and trade their trades,
Yes.
uh, or uh, other forms of investment. Nevertheless, Dubai creates opportunities and allows visionary thinkers to participate in a greater debate. So all been within all this within a very fragile environment. You know, the Middle
Yes.
East being one of those parts of the world. So at the moment, the UAE is held by the Arab world, especially by the Arab youth, as a place they all look up to. It's a small country, if you like, but because it's been consistently promoting alternative solutions and it's been encouraging engagement of the young, the youth look at it as a place to be and wanting to be. And so hopefully this continues for the future, and I'm sure you know, even greater things will happen. Yeah.
Yes. And when we are when we are looking at the whole thing in terms of uh, we think of, there is this contemporary style, there is this modern style, there is Renaissance style of architecture. When we are talking about different style of architecture, do you think that style of architecture is more of a context, or it can be the style of a person? That when I'm talking to you, is there any your personal style which you usually use in your projects, or you always go with the context of the project?
I could show you a few slides, and I think maybe when I do, you could have a chance to show them. I mean, what you see behind me,
Yes.
this one,
Yes. Yes.
it's a bridge. It's a bridge across the creek here, and we were asked to just put a pedestrian bridge across the waters,
Okay.
and we
Yes.
didn't think that there is a style to be applied. You know, in my mind was that, you know, I've got about 300 meters across the water. Some pedestrian sort of journey's got to take place. What are my challenges? And I knew that the heat was going to be a few months of the year, a serious challenge. But I also looked at the opportunities. This is one of the most beautiful parts of Dubai. It's the old creek. It's the old trading hub with some wonderful old and new buildings. So I thought, wouldn't it be, you know, here's a great opportunity to actually sit there and enjoy. And in fact, I think if you see here, where is
Yes.
it?
Yes.
There's a guy looking at a camera. Sorry,
Yes.
because I'm doing the reverse. Um, when I first proposed it to the client, I said, I want to call that a selfie platform.
Okay.
And the idea was that it was a place to stay, enjoy, and record it and show it off. So we put trees across, we put cycle tracks, we created a public realm, the cafes, and so it was the livability and the functionality that attracted us. And then we looked at the structure, the economy of executing this great big span. And then, so the function, if you like, defined the pattern or the style, as you put it, rather than the other way around. And if I have to say anything that I've tried to do in my work, is that I don't follow an ism, but I do try to sort of understand how the spaces can contribute and make a difference to the human experience,
Yes.
rather than just a pure visual insertion that may or may not be applicable to the context.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Kourosh, now we are in the final part of our podcast. So, London or Dubai?
Oof, oof, that's hard. London is my hometown and I live in Dubai. So both.
Okay. Mercedes or BMW?
BMW,
Whiskey or vodka?
whiskey.
Okay. Contemporary or modern?
Contemporary,
Lamborghini or Ferrari?
neither. I'm not a brand person.
Okay. With that said, it was a great time talking to you, Mr. Kourosh, and I hope our viewers will enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to you. It was a very nice time talking to you, and thank you so much for coming on our podcast.